Hello and welcome to the third in our series of really important and interesting talks around the topic of tinnitus. My name is Dr. Craig Casper. I am the Managing Director, founder of NYHD, New York Hearing Doctors, and the Institute for Hearing and Balance based in New York. I'm also the co-founder, CEO of Modern Tinnitus based in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we have put together some really amazing speakers over the course of a few weeks here. This is our second talk this week, centered again in the world of tinnitus. Today we have an amazing speaker. I'll introduce an amazing guest. I'll introduce him in just a moment. But before we get there, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. Again, thanking all of the different groups that made this series of talks possible, including my practice in the city, NYHD, Modern Tinnitus, again, as we said, the folks at Neuromod and Lanier, Hearing Doctors of New Jersey, based in Livingston, New Jersey, Audiology Associates of Westchester, based in Harrison, Mid-Island Audiology, based out in Plainview and other places on Long Island, as well as Liberty Hearing Centers, based in Brooklyn, New York. And all of these folks have made it possible for us to spread the word, basically, about these really important kind of cutting-edge talks in the world of tinnitus. Some of our primary goals, and if you've seen the other live streams that we have put out over the past few weeks, our primary goals are really to provide an educational platform and to really highlight the important work that's being done by professionals, and in this case today, a really important organization across the tinnitus care landscape. We really want to share critical and science-based information with all of you, whether you're a provider or if you are a tinnitus patient. And we also want to make sure that you understand that there truly is a holistic view, and there's so many effective things that we can do from a tinnitus treatment perspective that are truly intertwined. And that's why we pull together this multidisciplinary collaborative group of folks to take a look at tinnitus from different angles and different views of the prism. Ultimately, what we really want to help those of you who are out there is to really understand and to ensure that anybody who is impacted by tinnitus really understands that there are caring professionals, there are science-based tools, not things that are questionable, but real science-based tools out there and technologies that can truly help. It's really about matching up the individual with the right provider, with the right modality of treatment. But there are so many things that we can do for tinnitus at this point. And we're going to actually take a little bit of a dive into the history of tinnitus today. But we really want to make sure that everybody understands there's a lot that can be done at this point, but there's so much more that we need to do. We talked a little bit in the past about all of the speakers that we've assembled. If you have not seen the previous sessions, I would encourage you to take a look back at the YouTube channel here, which we can put a link actually in the ultimate video when this shows up on YouTube. I think maybe we can put that up, Robbie, if you're in the background. Robbie Sandler is our technical guru in the background there. So it's NYHD Life is the channel on YouTube. So that should help all of you find this at a later date if you need to look for other sessions. Initial sessions with Dr. Rachel Cook on biometrics and personalized care of tinnitus. I also spoke in our first session on real-world outcomes regarding the Lanier tinnitus device. Just a couple of days ago, we had Dr. Brian Brown, who is a clinical psychologist and brain health specialist, really helping us understand how to keep our brains healthy. And that was a really fascinating talk, and I would encourage you all just to take a look at that as well. Today, I'll introduce our guest in a moment, but Patrick Lynch, who is the CEO of the American Tinnitus Association, is joining us today. In a couple of weeks, we have Dr. Jason Leindecker talking about tinnitus retraining therapy and where that's come from, where that came from and where it's going. We also have Dr. Janet Kennedy talking quite a bit about and really interesting concept because sleep is intimately related to tinnitus, and she is a sleep health psychologist based in New York. And we will wrap up these sessions with Dr. Jennifer Gans, who is a clinical psychologist based in the San Francisco Bay Area, who is well known for her mindfulness-based tinnitus stress reduction course, and she'll be talking about anxiety and tinnitus. So if you'd like to register for any of the remaining sessions, this QR code is the way that you do that. You can also visit Beyond Tinnitus with the .us as the URL there, but you can also scan that QR code. And remember, you have to register for each individual session. So with that said, I'd like to just provide a brief introduction for our guest today. I'm really honored to have Patrick with us. Patrick is a really amazing human. And once you hear his personal story, and then ultimately what brought him into the world of tinnitus, I think you'll all believe and you'll understand the value that he brings to patients and also to clinicians in the world of tinnitus. But Patrick is an attorney by training. He also has an MBA. He has 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, government relations, and corporate law. As the chief executive officer for the American Tinnitus Association, Patrick leads the United States' only national public charity entirely dedicated toward providing support and funding research toward curing tinnitus. Prior to his role as CEO at the ATA, he served as the Chief Development Officer for Global Empowerment Mission, spearheading all fundraising initiatives for the International Disaster Relief Organization. A two-time survivor of childhood cancer, he also serves as a motivational speaker. Patrick has been given an official TED Talk, which can be found on TED.com, and we'll talk a little bit about that presentation today. He's spoken at national conferences and was recognized as a top national fundraiser by the Leukemia and Lymphoma Team and Training Program. He is an engaged volunteer and advocate for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and the National Marrow Donor Program. And recently he ran his first marathon to personally raise money and awareness for blood cancer. His personal story and health story doesn't stop there, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that Patrick has encountered in recent months. But with that said, I would like to bring Patrick to the stage here. And I just wanted to formally thank you face-to-face now for taking the time out of your busy schedule. And I know that there's a lot going on. You just joined up with the ATA earlier this year, so you've got a lot on your plate. But thank you, Patrick, for joining us today.
No, Craig, thank you so much for the introduction. It's genuinely an honor to be here. I'm thrilled to take part and have a really honest conversation about where we're at. It's as a new guy to the world of tinnitus from this point of view, I've been drinking from a fire hose the last few months, but in like the best of ways. So I appreciate the opportunity to have an honest conversation.
Awesome. Really looking forward to this one. I want to start off with a concept. So I'm a big believer in Stoic philosophy. I've been reading it for a number of years. And there is this concept in Stoic philosophy called memento mori. And memento mori is a principle that encourages us to keep our own mortality in mind. There's this element of the stories. If you read Marcus Aurelius and you read of any of the Stoic philosophers, they talk about actually the warriors before they went on to war having a coin essentially that was given to them by an assistant of some sort that literally reminded them that life is fragile and short. So it's not meant to be morbid necessarily. The concept of memento mori is not meant to be morbid, but instead it's really meant to inspire all of us to live fully, recognizing that our time is truly limited on this planet. Now, we'll dive into some recent stuff that you shared with me, if you're okay with that, in just a few minutes, because I think it really is an important part of your story. But in 2021, I alluded to this when I read your bio, you had a wonderful TED Talk. It's short, about 10, 11 minutes or so, but it is packed with emotion and it's packed with meaning. It is called How to Follow Your Heart. And it really is a story of building resilience through challenge, the way I perceive it. So maybe you can share a little bit about the foundation of the talk, because again, I really believe it's foundational to all the things that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for the chance. And I didn't realize this about you. I majored in philosophy as an undergrad. So the underpinnings for that talk actually stem back to Stoicism, and even before that, Socrates and Aristotle. So it's funny how life's moments kind of all tie into one another. And even in my career, once I transitioned out of law and into public charity work full time, my first job as a full-time fundraiser was with a local hospice. So talk about literally dealing with end of life issues on every facet of my life. But yeah, the TED Talk was a highlight for me personally and professionally. I've had a passion for public speaking since I was a teenager. I mean, the overview of the talk, and it ends, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I guess I will. Maybe they'll go watch it. But it ends with plan your funeral. And I hesitated when I was writing that talk. It's amazing how much work you have to put into a 10-minute talk. to keep it that short and that concise. Simple is not necessarily easy. And this talk was indicative of that. But I ended with plan your funeral, not because I wanted to be morbid, but to emphasize that other point, that it's, the one thing we all have in common is that this thing ends. And that's something to be aware of. And if you're in a good space, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, it's something you don't necessarily have to fear. The more at peace you are, the more you're able to work on things like anxiety and stress and fulfillment, the less you're worried about the end. But also, more importantly, if you're always cognizant of the fact that this thing will end at some point, it gives you this courage to, as I titled the talk, follow your heart. Imagine if you were blindsided later today with a 24-hour prognosis. And it's cliche to think of things that way, but it's cliche for a reason. It's true. Imagine if you really did only have 24 hours left on this planet. What would you really care about? What would you really do? Who would you really talk to? And my TED Talk, I don't necessarily like telling my own personal story for the sake of sharing a story, but I was able to weave my personal story into the talk because as a teenager, and you mentioned it in my introduction, I was diagnosed with cancer. I was diagnosed with leukemia as a sophomore in high school, fought it for 3 years with chemotherapy and spinal taps and radiation. Radiation wasn't the first time around. And then after fighting it for 3 years, I was diagnosed with it again, needed a bone marrow transplant my senior year of high school, at which point I also needed radiation. And at that point in time, I was told I had a 50-50 shot at surviving. If it was successful, it was a 50-50 shot. So I was 18. That experience, obviously it went well. I'm still here to share that story, thank God. But that experience, as you can imagine, highlighted what I was trying to put forth in a 10-minute YouTube TED Talk. How do I encapsulate that life experience of being literally told to deal with a glass is half full, half empty scenario in my life? I planned my funeral that year. I went from planning graduation to literally planning my funeral, picking the readers and the readings, talking about the homily where I was going to be buried. How do you take that life experience and what it did to me mentally and share that in a 10-minute talk? And a lot of the philosophy you were just kind of alluding to is naturally baked into that. And so, yeah, it was a wonderful experience. I would love the chance to do another one. And I love the opportunity to share the story, not because I like necessarily talking about myself, but it's the lessons that I was sort of forced to learn at a really young developmental age that have informed everything I've ever done since, including my career. So, that was a heck of an experience. And I hope it did what it was intended to do. And that was really why I did it. I wanted something to last beyond me because, like any other life lesson, if you can learn it without having to go through the cancer or the personal suffering or what have you, if you can learn that life lesson without carrying a cross to bear, you're going to live a much more fulfilled and content life.
Yeah, well, I can definitely say that the talk and the message that runs through it resonated deeply with me. And so you did a wonderful job. And I know how hard it is to make something so complex simple, right? Steve Jobs was masterful at that, taking the most complex things and making them simple. There's an element of this that I'm really, really curious about also, because recently, and just as recently as 15 minutes before we jumped on this live stream, you had another call with an oncologist based in New York, based on a recent experience where you were diagnosed not too long ago with colon cancer, surprisingly, in the most recent months. So I'm curious, because as an 18-year-old, having any sort of a health condition, health scare, life kind of altering and threatening position that you're in, it changes the way that you view the world in many, many ways. What kind of tools did you have when you got this most recent diagnosis that you took from those life experiences that helped you kind of push through this, maybe better than you would have pushed through if you didn't have those other experiences?
Yeah, you know what's really interesting? Thanks for the question. What's really interesting about my recent experience, which started 4 weeks ago, um, is and I experienced this when I was diagnosed with cancer the second time. So I was diagnosed with leukemia at 15, diagnosed the second time at 18, and then a month ago, as you mentioned, I was just diagnosed with colon cancer. I had an obstruction in my colon. I went to the ER. I was constipated, basically. I didn't think much of it. I went to the ER to see if there was some super pill they could give me. And within an hour, I was being told I had a tumor on my colon and I needed surgery 48 hours later. They cut out part of my colon within 48 hours. They put on a colostomy bag, which I'm living with right now, which I never thought I would need. But here to tell that story too. So what's interesting about the life experience, though, is when I went through it the second time, I thought I had learned my life lesson. I was giving cancer survival talks as a teenager. I was talking about how my life priorities had shifted. At the time I was at an all boys high school. So, my priorities as a teenager were, girls and grades and sports. And suddenly at that point in my life, my priorities shifted to God, family, and friends. And so I was giving these talks and thought I had learned my life lesson and paid my dues. And then I was diagnosed the second time. And suddenly the lessons I thought I had learned were being challenged, right? And that's exactly what happened this time around. I'm 25 plus years past the experience as a teenager, and out of nowhere, 4 weeks ago, I got home from a trip actually visiting the ATA headquarters in Washington, D.C., and on Sunday went to the ER because I was a little backed up, not thinking anything of it. And within an hour, I was told about the tumor and that I needed pretty major surgery. And so, again, the life lessons I thought I had learned were being questioned. And it's one of those things where it's like actions speak louder than words, So I could have been giving that same talk I was giving as a teenager, but or even the TED Talk. But suddenly the beliefs I was espousing to have were being challenged in a real visceral way. And it was not perfect. I mean, I have dealt with anxiety my entire life, very much so since the cancer experiences. So that kicked into high gear. I've had tinnitus myself since my cancer treatment as a teenager, which we can touch on. That even kicked into high gear. I experience my tinnitus at night when I'm trying to go to sleep or when it's really quiet. And that was getting worse. And so it's interesting just to hear about some of your speakers. And actually, one of your speakers is Jennifer Gans, who's on our board at the ATA. I have a great relationship with her. And, she's done a great job talking about the link between anxiety and tinnitus. So I experienced that. And looking at it, I mean, I was in surgery 4 weeks ago yesterday. And the anxiety doesn't go away until you know what's next. Mm-hmm. So I know my life is short. I know I should be thankful for every minute I have. But I was still panicking, still anxious, still having trouble with sleep because there was so much unknown. Would I need chemo? Would I not? What does my past history mean, et cetera? So you alluded to a call. I literally did just have a call about 30 minutes ago now. It was a second opinion with an oncologist in New York who confirmed what my first oncologist told me last week, which is the surgery took care of everything. It was a stage 1. It was a big tumor. It was about the length of my pinky finger in my colon, 60 millimeters. But the surgery took care of what they needed to take care of. So I won't need chemotherapy. I won't need immunotherapy. They'll monitor me closely going forward, but I can get my colon reconnected in about a month, get this colostomy bag off of me, which is a bit of a show and a scene to life adjustment, to be sure. But I think to answer your original question, I'm rambling a little bit here. You can know things here. It's different to have it in here and then to constantly live by it. None of us are perfect, and I'm among them. So I knew life was short here, but boy, was I reminded about that again 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, well, first of all, we're all clearly very happy that things turned out the way they did for you. And when you told me, you texted me, and we weren't sure if we were going to be on time for this conversation today because we didn't know how long your consult was going to take. Clearly, that's this is nothing in comparison to that. So I said, whatever, we'll figure it out. I had some other slides pulled up that we would have been able to present until you got here. But amazing to hear that, everything has worked out at this point, and you won't need to go through further treatment at this point. And after the surgery, you'll be running races again. So it's,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no, having your support means the world, and everything's been providential, right? So the consult ended just in time for us to do this, and I'm so blessed and thankful. It's all been good news.
Awesome. Really happy about that. It's interesting because you talk a little bit about tinnitus and chemo and all that. And clearly there's a lot of patients that have, at least the patients that we see, there's usually some sort of a trigger for their tinnitus perception. And it's usually rooted in some sort of a stressful event. And for you to describe the fact that your tinnitus was kind of fluctuating to the upside, especially during all these times, this period of uncertainty for you is not uncommon. I experience the exact same thing when I'm stressed, anxious, etc. But we're going to get to the tinnitus conversation in a little bit here. I'm really curious though, also because the core of your talk the core of your talk was really focusing on following your heart, right? How did following your heart lead you to the ATA?
That's an awesome question. Thanks. Yeah. So if you look at any aspect of this is a long-winded answer. I apologize in advance. If you look at any aspect of human history, whether it's philosophy, art, pop culture, science, you'll see aspects of the same idea throughout. Which I coined follow your heart or going with your gut. Religion will talk about your guardian angel or the Holy Spirit maybe speaking through you. Philosophy will talk, or psychologists will talk about intuition. Business leaders will talk about they don't know, they just had a feeling. Dealing with death and the reality of it at such a young formative age really put into perspective for me the importance of living life without regret in a very visceral way. I mean, you can know here, I'm going to die one day. You can know here, I should do what makes me happy. But having the courage to do that is a totally different conversation. And I was blessed to have survived a really traumatic experience at a young age, which in turn gave me this inner fortitude, this inner courage to maybe go against the grain of what I thought the world expected of me. So I share that because after college, I worked for a few years in politics. I grew up the son of a local state senator and thought maybe I'd go into politics myself. And that's what led me to law school. And I thought, I'll be a lawyer and get my MBA, and then, the world is my oyster. And I went through all of that, spent the money and the time to get my education, passed the bar exam, was practicing corporate law, and boy, was I miserable. But at that point, I had spent 4 years on my education, a lot of money, a lot of time. I felt pressure, whether real or not, from the world around me to keep doing it. Would I be embarrassed to not practice law full time anymore? Would my family be disappointed? Would my loved ones think differently of me? And so there were a lot of things I was kind of making up in my head about what I thought the world expected of me. And it got to a point where I was sitting in the parking lot outside my law firm one day. I live in Miami now, but at the time I was in Rhode Island and working for a firm out of Boston, where I grew up in Rhode Island. And I was sitting in the parking lot in the middle of winter. I was watching. It was so cold I could see the breath coming out of my mouth, but I would rather be sitting in that freezing cold car than going to my office because I got to the office early. And I realized, man, with the 18-year-old kid who planned his funeral and beat cancer, would he want to be this unhappy today? And of course, the answer was no. And that's sort of what gave me the courage to think about leaving law, and eventually led to me starting my career full-time in charity work and in fundraising. How did I end up at the ATA? Life has a funny way of bringing things together. So my career shifted into public charity work, specifically in fundraising. I enjoyed it. It was, it comes with its own set of, it's not perfect. There's a tremendous amount of pressure and expectation, especially in fundraising. But I felt much more fulfilled. You mentioned Steve Jobs earlier. He's famous for talking about wanting to make a dent in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always had that drive since I was a teenager. And I feel like I'm, at least attempting to make a dent now in a way that I wasn't when I was worrying about my billable hours as a lawyer. So my career in charity work started with healthcare, then it ended up in social services, and then in humanitarian relief when I was called about this organization called the ATA. I had never heard of the ATA up until that point, the American Tinnitus Association. And they were looking for a new leader, a new CEO, and would I be interested in having some conversations? And that's how it first came on my radar. And what blew me away, why did I make the decision to join once I was, thankfully that I was offered the opportunity? What pushed it over the edge for me was, as I was doing research about the ATA and about tinnitus, and this is coming from someone who's suffered from tinnitus for 25 plus years now. I didn't know the ATA existed before that. I was shocked to learn that patients today are still being told what I was told by my audiologist in the late 90s, which was, there's nothing we can do for you. Learn to live with it. Here's a technique for meditation. I couldn't believe that today patients are still being told that. And when I found out there was a charity dedicated exclusively to this issue that I suffer from myself, to change that perception, to change that outcome, to educate more people, that was really what led me to make the choice to hop on board. And I'll share one quick anecdote just because it's so recent. I've been on a new cancer journey now the last month. The first oncologist I met with a few weeks ago, I was super concerned about chemo because of my previous experience. And I was asking her a lot of different questions, and she interrupted me at one point. She said, "Patrick, respectfully, whether or not I would need chemo." She said, "Respectfully, chemo's come a long way in 30 years. And that was such a relief to hear as a patient. I would love for us to be able to say the same thing about tinnitus treatment in 30 years. And the fact that this charity exists, that I was given an opportunity to be a part of, was really, to answer your question, what led me to come here. The chance to make a dent in the tinnitus universe, for lack of a better.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love when there's personal connection to it, right? Because it's meaningful to you on so many different levels. And when I talk to my patients, I explain the fact that I've experienced tinnitus throughout most of my life because I was a stupid kid who played bass in a hardcore band. I had a lot of noise exposure. And, luckily in my particular case, it's not something that I notice on a day-to-day basis, but when I'm stressed, tired, quiet environment, my tinnitus it fluctuates to the upside, and I'm more aware of it. So I can totally empathize with what my patients go through, at least for that brief moment of time, right? Which that's my advantage. It's only for a brief moment of time. But I think that for us to have personal connections to the things that we are working, the problems that we're looking to solve makes it even more important, right? And it's, you're trying to change the world. And I think that just to go back to the conversation about what's happened in chemo over the past 30 years, a lot has happened in the tinnitus world over the past 30 years. Unfortunately, it's been slow, right? It's not like, it's not life-threatening like cancer, where a lot of money would go into research and all of that, but it is life-altering, and it could potentially be life-threatening for some people, right? Yes. So our hope, and I'm sure that you share this, is that, and you just explained your thoughts, is that it would just be taken more seriously in terms of at least the educational elements of it. Right? Is how do we educate the people who are in the front lines to help spread that message of there is so much that can be done. It doesn't come in the form of a pill usually, but there is so much that can be done. There's a lot of well-meaning clinicians out there. I want to talk a bit about the ATA now, because it's an organization that has deep roots. There are folks who have founded this organization that were literally the only voices out there at a period of time talking about this. And at this point, all of us who either practice, and Patrick, I'm sure you would agree also, is we're standing kind of on the shoulders of giants, people who had, big ideas and big hopes and all of that. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the history of the ATA, and then I think this is where I can share some of your slides, right? You had some.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. I mean, the history of the ATA, you're absolutely correct. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And I want to also help clarify. When I share the anecdote about 30 years of chemo compared to 30 years in tinnitus, I certainly don't want to diminish the amazing strides we've made in the field. But I think you touched on something interesting, which is it's beholden on those of us who are stakeholders in the profession to amplify those strides, to talk about them, educate folks, whether we're educating a provider or a patient. And that's what's super unique about the ATA, in particular, our history and how we were founded. We were founded, this I don't need to share too much on. We all know about tinnitus and how many of us are affected by it. And I actually saw a study recently that the number is much higher than 50 million. However, we were founded in 1971 by two gentlemen named Charles Eunice and Jack Vernon. And this is, forgive me for those of you who are on the call who know this story better than me. I preface all of this with, I'm the new guy in the room here, and I don't have a professional background in hearing healthcare. So I'm doing my best here to honor our history. However, so we were founded in 1971. There was a gentleman named Charles Eunice who back then, this is pre-Google, pre-internet, pre-Wi-Fi, he was suffering from tinnitus and was desperate for help and an answer and hope. Long story short, through going to the NIH and looking up people who are researching the topic, he came across the name of a guy named Jack Vernon. He literally flew to Oregon, where Jack Vernon was based at his university, and implored him to help directly. Now, Jack was a researcher and made it clear to Charles, there's nothing I can do for you directly. I'm not a physician. I'm just researching tinnitus. I don't really have much to offer you. But Charles was frustrated by having been told the idea, get used to it. And as was Jack. Really long story short, there was a eureka moment between the two of them after they going back and forth about could Jack help, why Jack couldn't help, thank you, but no thank you. They were sitting in front of, the way I've been told the story, they were sitting in front of a water fountain when Charles noticed, my gosh, the noise of this water is, I don't notice my tinnitus as much anymore. And that led to one of the early breakthroughs in tinnitus treatment and therapy and management, which is simply background noise therapy. I know there's an official term for that I'm messing up here, but again, I'll preface it with I'm not a doctor. And that was the birth of the ATA. Once that eureka moment happened, they realized they wanted to share the result of any subsequent research with the world. And because it was pre-internet, pre-Google, pre-email, they basically started a mailing list with a newsletter. And if you sent in a nominal fee to be a member of the American Tinnitus Association, you would get a newsletter with the latest news and update and research. There was nowhere to Google, there was no one to call. But if you wanted a newsletter on a regular basis, you could make a yearly contribution to this new nonprofit and get a newsletter. And that's been at the heart of who we are ever since. We were founded officially as a 501c3 in 1971. So we're an official tax-exempt organization, a public charity in the eyes of the IRS, with a charitable mission that still exists today. We exist to promote relief, help prevent, and this I know is somewhat of a controversial word in the space, but find cures for tinnitus is in our mission. I know cures, again, is sometimes a difficult word to use, but that's what we're pursuing. If you aim for the moon and miss, at least you end up among the stars. So that's our story. We were founded by a patient and a researcher who were looking to share more information and find solutions and share that with the world. I have a short video that if this works, I can share it with you guys. It's only about 1.5 minutes long, but it's sort of, today, where are we? And we just completed this video to try and share with the world how I see the ATA as a patient leader, which is new for our organization. For years, we've been led by folks who are incredibly intelligent, who have a close connection to hearing healthcare, or tinnitus research. But I believe this is a new chapter for us, in that we're looking at ourselves today and as a public charity first, with a mission. And this video, I hope, does a decent job of sharing that vision.
Over 50 million Americans live with tinnitus every day, experiencing constant noise and ringing in their ears. The impact on those afflicted can range from a daily nuisance to absolute agony, driving some to the thoughts of self-harm and even suicide. For more than half a century, the American Tinnitus Association has been a beacon of hope and support for those afflicted, offering research, support, and advocacy. Founded in 1971, the ATA began with one patient seeking out one researcher, and that led to an entire organization dedicated to understanding and treating tinnitus. Today, over 50 years later, thanks to the unwavering support of our donors and partners, we've been able to fund groundbreaking research, a support hotline for patients and professionals, and ongoing education for clinicians and providers. But we know our journey is far from over. The path to a cure requires everyone's support, and with each step, we are getting closer. Our roadmap for the future is clear. Continue funding the most promising research, expand our education and outreach, and ensure that no one has to face tinnitus alone. With your donations and support, the American Tinnitus Association will continue to fight for the pursuit of silence and help millions live better lives. Please consider a donation today.
So that's Bryn. This is the world premiere for that video. It's getting released formally next week, but I thought it was a great opportunity to share. So
appreciate that
world premiere there. But yeah, and that's our history and how we got to today. I can go through one more slide real quick here just to show you. I joined in April, so it's been about 5 months now, and a lot of my vision still, our vision has to be enacted, but we've made a few small changes. The number one change that was the easiest was to drastically increase our presence on social media, not because I'm a social media guy, but because that's part of our mission, right? It's sharing information. So if in 1971, sharing information meant a newsletter, today it means digital media and obviously social media. So our monthly posts, meaning how many posts we're putting up each month, is up 8x from last year and the year before. That has been a part of, in addition to a few other small changes we've made. We've seen an increase in our monthly giving, and in our, what we've called for years, our memberships. We're really excited about that, and that's a big piece of my vision. Now, someone might say, well, there's questions that come along with, why are you asking for money? Why are you asking for donations? And it's actually pretty simple. We're a charity with a charitable mission to silence tinnitus through the programs that we've already done and the research we're looking to fund. So a rising tide lifts all boats, and we're hoping to be a part of that tide. So we want to increase the work we've done. We want to fund more research, more meaningful research. We want to educate more clinicians in a much more formal way if possible. All of that takes resources. And so we've had incredible support over the last 54 years, going all the way back to Jack and his vision. We've done a lot of great things, but we want to do a lot more. And so at the core of who we are, our why, is our mission. And that's sort of where we're headed. And our history, which you started this question with, is rooted in everything we're going to be doing in the coming months and years.
Well, it sounds like you've done a lot in such a short period of time. which is awesome, because I know that the clinicians, there's an energy around ATA again, which is really, really nice, because ultimately the people who are going to benefit are the patients. Looking back at when you just kind of jumped into the ATA, that April timeframe, what was kind of when you assess the state of the ATA at that point, right? Clearly, there's a lot of things when you come in as a newcomer, you have new ideas, there's things that you might want to improve upon, et cetera. But was there something that impressed you most about the organization that was kind of unique to the organization, unique to the people that were surrounding it?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I have, thanks. Yeah, I have, so I've been in public charity work for a little while now. If you count my childhood and my personal experience with healthcare, really my whole life, I've been involved with some kind of a charity one way or the other. The ATA is genuinely the first charity I've come across where every initial stakeholder I met, whether it was a member of the board or a volunteer or a donor, cared deeply about the mission. I've been part of charities where the board, a board member might have a personal motivation, or they were doing a favor to someone, or a donor was simply trying to get a tax write-off. And that is not the case with the ATA. I have yet to come across someone who's been involved with us over the last 54 years who, for one reason or another, their loved one suffered from tinnitus, they suffer from it themselves, or they're a provider who wants to learn more and teach more. At every single level, there is a deep, deep connection to the mission, and people who are very passionate about tinnitus. That's music to anyone's ears who's a staff member or a fundraiser for a charitable organization, because time, talent, and treasure, right? So obviously fundraising is paramount to everything we do, but it's not the only thing we need. We need volunteers for our support groups around the country. We need clinicians to want to learn more about tinnitus. We need providers who we can list on our website and certify that they know something, or at least have an interest in tinnitus. So the fact that we've got a core group of volunteer leaders at every level who care about tinnitus today and where it's headed was the first thing I noticed immediately in April.
So the ultimate goal is to help people who are dealing with tinnitus and managing tinnitus, and hopefully managing tinnitus. How can patients benefit from all the work that the ATA is doing, right? Because it seems you were talking about clinicians, which is important. Getting clinicians, that's a bottleneck in many ways, is finding experienced, well-meaning clinicians that are understanding of exactly, how to help someone kind of go along this journey with tinnitus to get them to a better place. But how can patients really benefit from all the work the ATA is doing? Because it's doing a lot, right? And how does it trickle down to the patient? You follow what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of research elements to this. You support research, and that's a critical element here. But how are the patients benefiting from all of this?
It depends. Really great question. It really depends on what the patient needs, right? So some of the things that I think are the most tangible that we're doing today, that I'm looking forward to doing more of and better in the future, relate to information, our hotline, our 1-800 hotline that's available 24/7, and connections, helping folks find experts in their zip code or in their backyard. So we help organize support groups, peer support groups, that I'm hoping to formalize and make much more robust. And if we can raise enough money, maybe even support them with private grants. But if you want a support group of folks who get it, I went through that with my cancer treatment as a teenager. When I met other teenagers who had cancer, that was life-changing for me.
Yeah.
The same is true for tinnitus. So we have support groups. We have the 1-800 hotline. So if you're a loved one of someone who has it, or you want to learn more about tinnitus itself, that 800 hotline's on our webpage, providing more information. So the social media push, and we're redoing the website now. It's going to take a little while, but we're redoing a lot of the back end stuff now. Information through the web, through our website and through social media. And then what we're hoping to grow in the next year or so is our membership, what we're calling now our membership portal, But that has a lot more robust information as well. And we've been for years publishing a magazine, so that was rooted in our newsletter. I'm working on digitizing that. Hopefully, maybe even we'll have a Chat GPT trained chatbot for people who have questions. That's sort of where I'm seeing us going. And then the third thing I mentioned that we're already doing today is putting folks in touch with professionals. So we're doing our best to make that easier. It's going to get easier going forward. But those are three of the main things we do now today for patients. And you're right, the education of clinicians and the research, that's all sort of forward facing. But if you're one of the upwards of 70 million Americans who have this thing, depending on how severe it is, those are three of our best resources right now: information, connection, and local peer support.
Which information is really, it serves as a good educational foundation is critical, especially when you have all of the nonsense that's online that is turning the conversation into, I don't know, clicking spoons on the back of the head and stuff that just has no merit or science behind it whatsoever. And it's unfortunately, that's when patients start to spiral, where we can avoid that if we just have good foundational information for them at the start. So backing up just a little bit, because I think this is a critical part in the journey for the patient, is the clinician part of it. So what types of resources do you have currently? And ultimately, are you looking to potentially develop to broaden out that network of professionals? Because as we said just a few minutes ago, that's one of the biggest challenges that patients face, is finding someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah. Yes, that's that is a priority of mine and the ATA's going forward, is making that more robust. There's already incredible organizations that do a great job of educating hearing healthcare providers and audiologists in particular, as you know. We want to do our best to share as much information as possible. So we've got an incredible board of directors who are focused on this exact issue. We're going to start, we want to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, but we don't want to duplicate efforts, and we don't want to put out information that hasn't been vetted appropriately. So, it will start, it's sort of a trickle effect. It will basically start with us sharing some version of lectures from trusted resources to start. And then the idea would be, if that takes off and the audience responds, we'll look to formalize that more and more. I have to be careful what I say publicly in terms of what that becomes. I can't say today we're going to be a certifying body or anything like that. There are organizations that already do a lot of that for us already. But I think what we can do is start by sharing information from other professionals, whether it's a researcher or a provider who specializes in tinnitus today that we know is a trusted source. Share information directly from them, and then work with some of our friends to slowly over time formalize that. Whether it becomes a CEU or a certification, I'm not as concerned with today as I am with, let's get some of that information out there for the folks who have maybe someone wants to know more about how to talk about CBT, or a provider wants to learn more about bimodal stimulation, whatever the treatment thing is. We have those resources that we're trying to just get recorded basically and share there. That's all I can share publicly now, but I do think it's very much needed, and we serve we're like a unique position here in the industry, because we're really the only organization in the US that's focused exclusively on tinnitus, that sits at the intersection of all three of these stakeholders: providers, researchers, and patients. And I think that unique intersection, it offers us the latitude to not have to worry so much about being like an academic institution, but at the same time, we're more trusted than a Google search that tells you to tap the back of your head with a spoon, right?
Sure.
So I'm hoping that we can continue to sit at that intersection and share more information from that lens.
I think if I look back to our first conversation when we met at the Tinnitus Research Initiative conference in Vancouver earlier this year, one of the things that was kind of top of mind for you is this element of how do we get more collaborative with all of the parties that should be at the table. And ATA definitely should be at the center of that in many ways. Like you have the academic institutions, you have the professional associations, et cetera, and the ATA, patient groups, et cetera, is bringing all those stakeholders to the table, which you've done so many times throughout the course of your career and other jobs and other positions, I'm sure. It's how do you get everybody talking and kind of marching in the same direction. And that's something I think that is a very potentially valuable, just from my own silly head, is a potentially very valuable role that the ATA can play, is that independent kind of field general for all the things that are happening, that are wonderful things that are happening in the world of tinnitus care and research, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Craig. There are so many amazing people in this space. And, what we were just talking about earlier, like what was the first thing I noticed when I joined the ATA, and it was this passion. With that passion also comes some deeply rooted opinions and deeply like emotionally held beliefs, even at a scientific level. And the thing I think that the ATA has the most opportunity in is sort of serving as like the referee or the field general in terms of helping us all kind of stay focused on that North Star and not to get bogged down in deeply rooted ways of doing things in the past. And so if we can serve some small role, I think it's easier said than done. But that's my hope, as a humble, patient leader here. I'm just coming in with a different perspective. Going back to our philosophy at the top of the conversation, Socrates is famous for founding Western philosophy, which in turn eventually led to the scientific method and modern medicine as you know it today. But he started with a simple statement: all I know is that I know nothing. And if you go to law school, you learn via the Socratic method. You don't get a lecture. You get a law professor constantly asking questions for an hour. That's sort of how I'm treating the ATA. I'm coming in with a blank slate and asking genuine, simple questions with no real motivation other than following where the answers take us. Yeah. And I think that's the voice we can serve for all these different stakeholders is, hey, look, here's the level playing field. Let's remember our mission, which is to silence this thing. How can we work together on whatever the question is and just be honest with ourselves about where that answer takes us?
I think that's beautiful. It's interesting because my father told me years ago, and he just turned 90 a couple of weeks ago. We talked about him in our last session with brain health, which I won't get into that. If you guys are interested in hearing that story, you can go back to the previous episode with Dr. Brian Brown. But he always said to me, he said, it's interesting. The older I got, the more that I knew, the more I realized I didn't know anything. Right. So it's humbling as you get older and as you get more information, because you realize that you don't know everything. And I literally have these conversations with my clinicians that I work with and that I mentor throughout the course of the days and weeks and years, is that they say, well, what do you do in this particular situation? And I said, sometimes it's okay to actually say, I really don't know the answer, because we don't know the answer to everything. But if you can work around the problem and you try to kind of look at it from different angles, maybe you don't have the exact answer, but you can start to work towards getting the answer. And I think that looking at this from a multi-dimensional approach, as you're describing, with getting all the stakeholders together, having a facilitator, maybe the referee is a little too harsh of a term, right? Maybe just the facilitator for the conversations. But at times you might need a referee, because there are some, in every scientific field, in every field, there's personalities, and they're all well-meaning people who just want the same thing, right? So I would think that you guys would definitely serve as a wonderful role in that perspective. We're coming up here. We only have about 6 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of your time also. I have a couple of questions that came from the audience. I just want to pop this up on stage here because I think this is important. And then I would like to finish up with just one last question before I let you go today. But the question we have here is, how can we advocate for more research and treatment for tinnitus? So it's kind of dovetails with another question that was posed also, is how can one volunteer for the ATA? I think they're intimately involved.
Yeah, they are. Well, those are two really awesome questions, and it's why we exist, right? So I'll start with volunteer. If you visit ata.org, you'll find, and the way the website exists today, it will change. Some of this information is going to get easier to find. Website changes take longer than you'd imagine. So we're working actively on simplifying some of this, but there are volunteer opportunities on ata.org, or you can call the 1-800 number that's on the website. But I would say go there first. One of the things that we could benefit from the most are our support groups, our peer support groups. Mm-hmm. So if you think that's something you might be interested in your own community, check out our website for information like that. The advocating for research and funding starts with an organization like ours. We're not the only nonprofit that's focused on hearing healthcare. So whether it's the ATA or another organization, donating to a charity you believe in and you think that aligns with your mission is the best way. So we cannot give what we do not have. The ATA in its mission, for example, we fund research. We funded $500,000 in research grants this summer. We're actually right before I saw you in Vancouver, Craig, when we met. Right now, we're funding what we call seed grants. So they can be as small as $20,000, as high as $60,000 each. That sounds like a lot of money, but in research, believe it or not, that's actually not that much money. And for all the time it takes for a researcher to apply for a grant, sometimes there's a threshold where they may not even apply because they need that much more money for the research. So I would love it if we were funding $1 million grants, multi-million-dollar grants. We don't have multi-million-dollar funds for funding research. So the more you can donate, whether it's $5 or $5 million, the more it'll impact research. But the other way to impact research is politically. So, we are a 501c3, so we're not politically, we're politically neutral. However, organizations like the NIH, organizations like the VA and Congress, there's a hearing healthcare caucus made up of Congress folks who care deeply about these issues. 30% of military veterans suffer from some form of tinnitus. Over 90% of folks in the entertainment and music industry, first responders, they all suffer from tinnitus. If you call your local representation, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or agnostic, and you let them know you're a voter, that you are their constituent, and that you want more funding for tinnitus research, that's a number one way to really move the needle. So donating, getting involved with your local representation, and paying attention to what's out there are the three best ways. But ata.org has a lot of that information, or you can find us on social and DM us there.
Perfect. I'm glad you brought up the veteran element of this, because you take a look at service-connected injuries and it's right up there at the top. So thank you for bringing that up as well. Look, there's so many questions here that are in the chat. Some of them are clinical based. I wish we had a chance to actually address, and I think we've talked about a lot of these questions, but the one question that I want to end on, at least for this conversation, and I know that this will probably be the first of many conversations that you and I will have going forward. But if you had just one message for someone who's out there who is dealing with tinnitus, or their loved one is dealing with tinnitus, what would that message be for them?
You're not alone. The ATA was founded and exists literally to make sure you know you're not alone. So if you are a clinician or provider who feels lost and overwhelmed with the idea of treating tinnitus patients, if you have a loved one who, you're stretching the limits of what you're capable of, or if you're a patient who's just looking for some kind of reliable piece of information, you're not alone. Organizations, not just the ATA, there are other organizations that exist to help. Just ask. And if you want to be part of the movement, if you want to be part of this research or helping someone else, we're that platform. The ATA is one of those platforms where you can be part of the change. So I think oftentimes with tinnitus, it's easy to get stuck in no one gets it. This is a condition that, unlike my cancer, for example, you can't see or feel. It may not necessarily be directly life-threatening. And so you might think it's hard to find empathy if you have tinnitus or know someone who has tinnitus, but that's not the case. There are as many as 70 million Americans who have this thing. That means there's at least 70 million Americans who are going through it with you, just silently sometimes. So asking for help is the first step, or volunteering to be part of the help, whether it's with a $5 gift or some of your time. you're not alone, and we're here to be part of that help.
Awesome. Patrick Lynch, I'm glad that we crossed paths in Vancouver and started the conversation. I'm glad that you are at the helm of this organization with a new set of eyes and with a wonderful board behind you to start making some great decisions about how to move the ATA forward. And most importantly, I'm glad that you're on the road to better health right now, based on recent events. It's really good to spend the time with you. I appreciate you sharing your background, your story, and ultimately the story of hope for all of us who are working in the world of tinnitus care. So thank you for everything.
Well, Craig, I mean, ditto. Thank you for this opportunity. I think what you're doing here is a tremendous part of what needs to be done. And I'm honored to be a small part of that and consider myself at service to you and your network. If there's ever anything I or the ATA can do, that's what we're here for. And thank you for the opportunity to do the platform. We're not perfect, but we're trying our hardest, and we want to do more. So thanks for the opportunity to share our story.
I appreciate that. And I think we're all far from perfect, and we're all just doing our best every day, right? So for those of you who are interested in registering for the remaining sessions, so next week we have a week off, and then after that we have 2 sessions back-to-back on Tuesday and Wednesday of the following week, which, if I get my dates correct, I'm blanking on the dates here and it's probably not even going to matter if you are watching this recorded, but we are looking at the 19th and 20th of November, which will be the remaining sessions. I hope you will join us for that. If you go to the Beyond Tinnitus website, which is on the screen right now, you can register for those remaining sessions. And as always, you can find them on our YouTube channel as well. Patrick, awesome to see you. We will catch up soon, and looking forward to seeing everybody at the next Tinnitus Collaborative session.
Thank you again.